Hello.
Hello, hello.
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 Hello, all you lovely Voidwalkers. What?
Just to see if we kept just going hello for an eternity here.
You just
But hey,
you're
folks are
just
here for what is this? The first?
the first episode that they'll know. Our Voidwalkers will know that this is the first episode. Um
Of
I
the
am Dave
and I am Liz.
and we are
The
the Confabulators.
Our synchronizing
don't
still
know
doesn't work.
We're fine, Liz. We're fine. And if you don't know, hey, if you don't know what the Confabulators are, if you don't know what that means, ask your mom.
Mhm.
So,
Well, with
Liz,
this first ever episode of this, we're kicking off our first ever season now with what is our topic?
horror.
Ooh, I love it. I love it. So this is horror. This is all things horror. This is games. This is movies. This is TV shows. This is books. Everything and anything related to horror, horror storytelling, techniques, you name it. But we
You've
figured getting us going, we had to ask the very important question is, what are our horror backgrounds?
That's a very good question, and I'm glad that you asked it. Um, so my horror background goes back to like childhood, things like, um, golly, like, well, that wouldn't be horror. Sorry, my brain went to RoboCop, but no, things like the OG Friday the 13th, the OG Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, like all those things. I was exposed to those as a child, in varying degrees. Famously, at least for me, famously, I used to have a My Buddy doll, and then I saw the Child's Play trailer, and I cried so much because I thought that my Buddy doll would come to life and kill me that my parents had to get rid of it.
I love it.
Um,
I love it.
so
The childhood fears at play. So, well, then to that
yeah,
end, yeah, because you had an earlier introduction to horror than me. You also were there for. I was probably too young for some of the OG classics coming out. So
yeah.
probably just a bit too young. But so because my early childhood exposure to horror, not so much the first stuff I watched, but my first kind of understanding of the existence of that genre. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff that just didn't really stick in my head, and then nothing really stuck in my head until that one Final Destination movie trailer that everybody now remembers. It's like iconic images from our childhood that were ended up being like core memory moments, and I swear for every like everybody from like late Gen X through millennial, it's that one Final Destination trailer with the logs.
Yep, the highway scene.
Like
That's
if I get behind any vehicle that is carrying anything even remotely shaped like that, I'm like, and I'm merging over and going up the road that way.
not that merging over saved everybody on
Oh,
that
I try to get
highway.
ahead of them. My plan is merge over and get beyond them. All that shit can happen behind me.
Yeah. Well, you know.
I love it. I love it. So
Um,
then what was the first thing to introduce you? I guess probably the first thing to specifically induct you into horror. How old were you? What was that like?
golly. Um, well, the first thing that I remember, um, funny enough, was the very thing that I mentioned to you, which was Child's Play, which I believe came out in 1988. Um, and so that would be when I was 5. Uh,
You were so
so I was a little tyke, and before that, I don't think I had too much concept in regards to like horror.
little.
Um,
I
the
mean,
the
you only
funny
had about two
thing,
more years earlier was about the beginning of like formed memory anyways, so.
yeah, I mean, more or less. Um, Not that I'm saying I'm a prodigy or anything like that. I'm not. Like, I was just a dumb kid. But when it comes to like 5, like something like that really sticks out for you, and it kind of like just sticks in your memory forever.
Hmm.
As I have proven that it's been since I was 5 that I've had that experience in memory.
Core
So
childhood memory right there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but I will say that with that, I've seen more and more horror things like that I know that I've seen after that period, and they all had like a certain level of like creepiness and like weird uh uh horrificness slash appeal. I don't know how to explain it. Like sometimes something is like really grotesque or disgusting, and yet it also appeals and makes curiosity form. And then it's like, okay, well, what's this about? I guess, and you just kind of like get into it, and then before you know it, you're watching uh, Jason punch a dude's head off in on a rooftop because the dude tried to box Jason and got worn out before he could get him off the roof.
I love it. I love
Um,
it.
so
Oh,
yeah,
that's
that
great.
would be my, I guess, formative kind of thing. How
Hmm.
about yourself?
I mean, for me, I know I mentioned Final Destination. I will admit though that before then, like I remember like Goosebumps being a big deal and everything when I was a kid, but I grew up my family was fairly my mom was fairly adamant that I not be exposed to that. And the background to that is a story that she would tell me of why I was so sheltered for certain things. Like I wasn't allowed to watch certain things because they were either too violent or this or just too mature. But part of it was that their experience with, because I'm the youngest of three, that my oldest sibling, when she was like barely like out of toddlerhood, my parents were watching the old Lou Ferrigno Hulk on TV. And
Mhm.
I guess she just saw some of it there. I mean, this is not anything scary, but just the visual apparently scared my older sister as a baby, and she was in that sort of young formative years. And I think it was from more, and I'm sure it's more as like as a child if you don't understand it. Some kids may be more alarmed by the angry green guy on screen, and I guess that scared her and gave her bad dreams. And so my mom afterwards was like, I don't want to expose these kids too young and have negative impacts on them as children. Not necessarily that would have a long term, but just it's difficult as a parent when your kid starts having nightmares and you realize, oh, I bet it was this bit of visual media that gave them
Mhm.
nightmares because it clearly was abnormal and scarier and harder to understand. So I didn't get exposed to a lot of that till later, but like I knew what the Goosebumps books were. I thought they looked kind of creepy in this because we didn't have anything horror related in the house. As a kid though, and I think back on like the stories that I would come up with as a kid, I think that some of my brain already inclined towards it, especially because I liked to torment my characters.
Mhm.
So apparently my mind already was kind of moving in those directions with the stories that I would come up with as a kid, where it'd be like, and now this character is drowning in a vat, like called, like I distinctly remember this visual in my head from a story I made up as a kid that was like the dogs from the 101 Dalmatians, and it's like the witch from Snow White is drowning one in a
Mhm.
vat, and he must come rescue them. That, mind you, this is not me being like anti-animals. This is me. I loved them so, but as apparently as a small child, I decided that building character meant torture characters. So
Uh-huh.
the mentality was there. I just didn't quite pinpoint it. But yeah, I mean, I was also the kid who was scared of the gorilla suit in Gilligan's Island and the wolves
Uh,
in Beauty and the Beast. Those scared me.
it, it's funny. Because RoboCop, I went to the theaters to see RoboCop as a kid. My parents brought me because they were like, he's a good kid. He'll sit and watch. Because I do.
Mm-hmm.
And RoboCop, I don't know if you've seen it, but it has a lot of really hard violence to it because it's meant to be over the top. It's meant to be like ridiculous and parody and whatnot, or satire, whatever. Um, and so scenes like when ED-209 blows that one corporate guy away, and I was like there for it. I loved it. But then like, then you have the converse of like Child's Play, and it's like scarring. It's very funny how that works.
I know, yeah. And so yeah, and that's kind of like with me, like because I was so sheltered, I did what little kids will do on like a Saturday morning, which is, other than like playing games and the like one time we were allowed to watch certain commercial TV with cartoons, but I would also do the sneak between channels. And
Hmm.
mind you, we didn't have cable. We had basic network. But
Hmm.
some channels, especially Saturday mornings, it'd be some movie. One channel I remember as a kid was showing something I've never in my life been able to figure out what it was they were showing. So if you out there, dear Voidwalkers, recognize the scene I'm about to describe to you and what it's from, please tell me because I have wondered. Because it freaked me the fuck out. And it was just kind of me like switching channels, then switching back. So, like my family, my parents upstairs wouldn't know that I was toggling between commercial TV and PBS because
Yeah.
I was only allowed to watch PBS unless I had permission to watch something else. Um, I love my parents, by the way, and they totally know I'm into horror movies and are like whatever. But they're like, you're an adult now; it's your issue. But whatever it was, it had this big climactic scene where it was like these young people end up getting stuck on a carnival ride. I remember somebody at one point, I think, like kind of falling into a carnival ride. It's nighttime. It's this like dinky carnival roller coaster going through something. You see again that sort of creepy clown face that of course is popular imagery, creepy clowns, but it's like something that looks like it's got choppers, but the choppers look like biscuit cutter, like those old metal biscuit cutter cookie cutter things with like the handles, except each one is like sawed down to like teeth, and it's just this thing inside a giant wood cutout frame of a clown's mouth, but the teeth instead are these things chopping up and down. And the last frames I remember of it were this ride with these freaked out people going towards this weird choppy thing, and then visual from the other side of it of look like meaty bones coming out the other side. Like somebody took a bunch of raw chicken and just threw it out the other side, but it's supposed to be, it chopped them all up. That freaked me
It
out.
sounds like
I
it
cannot figure
sounds
out
like
what it
some
is.
indie thing.
I don't know what it is. I
Like,
think it was actually supposed to be like a teen kids movies, like kind of Goosebumps era. I don't know. I've never been able to figure it out at all. But that was probably like enough to be like, oh, that's freaky. I'm gonna keep going. But my first big like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and watch a horror movie though, actually was not until I was in high school. I was
mhm.
a sophomore in high school, with some girlfriends of mine. It was, oddly enough, it was homecoming like week, and the night of the homecoming game, we decided, and none of us was into sports. We were art students. We were all like, fuck it. Let's go to the movies. The new Grudge movie with Sarah Michelle Gellar is coming out. And, I think we were all at that age where we wanted to be a little risque. Let's go see a horror movie, let's go be cool like that. So we go to see it. I didn't sleep normally for the rest of that year at all. Spent that entire movie with my three girlfriends. We're all gripped. I've got my hand getting gripped on two sides. On one side's one friend, and she's gripping me, and we're there. Because you get to that first thing, like we're watching, it's like, okay, we're watching. And then the first time on the stairwell, when the woman turns around and her jaw is like gone, and we all freaked out. And then somebody further back in the movie theater, because it was a fairly empty theater. So we all freak out and start laughing, which if that had been the entire experience of the movie, I would have been great. I probably would have done much better in it. But the problem was that there were other people in the fairly empty theater, though, that basically told us to shut up. So then we had to be quiet through the whole movie, which meant you had to just watch it. Meanwhile, like one friend spends the entire movie like hands over her ears, eyes closed, and my friend next to me, my other friend on the other side of me, is sitting there death gripping my hand. We get to the end of it, it was like, oh gosh, that was so fucked up. And she's like, that was amazing. And I'm like, what the fuck?
No one no one thought about running their fingers through the back of another person's hair, like just from behind.
No, none of that, but we were over at
Because that would have been very fun.
well, in fairness, none of us thought of that, but we were over at that friend's house, the one who loved it. We were at her house later,
Mhm.
hanging out in the basement before we actually went to the homecoming game. If I remember correctly, because of course there's that distinct sound, and we were all making it at each other. We were being silly, but we were hanging out in the basement. I forget what we were chatting about, and and it was kind of dark. I don't think we didn't have the lights out. We were just sort of hanging out. I forget what was going on, except that I just remembered that her little brother definitely pranked us and took full advantage that we had all just seen a creepy movie and definitely like snuck up on us in the dark or whatever. Because I vaguely remember suddenly all four of us just like screaming bloody murder, and her little brother looking like, oh yeah, I got you.
That's very
I
funny.
got you. And then we spent the entire homecoming game just literally imitating that demon spirit thing, just going at each other. I mean, I'm sure there were people at the game being like, "The fuck is wrong with those chicks?"
Yeah.
Because we had just got, we did not care about. I don't know if we won the game or not. I don't care. The only thing I cared about with the homecoming game, honestly, was the marching band, because my friends were
Mhm.
also marching. My other friends were marching band geeks. So, but yeah, that was my first experience with horror. It literally fucked with my sleep for the entire rest of the year. Like I had trouble going to sleep every single night for the rest of that year until the summer when I finally like reorganized my entire bedroom and the furniture, and suddenly it was like, okay, I can be peaceful again.
Mhm.
That was my first experience.
Fantastic.
It
Okay.
was-
Well, what about your first game?
That's very easy to remember.
Mhm.
Mostly because after The Grudge, I basically swore off horror. I was like, I want nothing to do with this genre. It's too much. It's too much. Which is hilarious because as the years went on, I got gradually exposed to more of it. Like, I ended up over the summer right before senior year, we were sitting there between practices when I was in California training with another team out there. In between practices, we're all sitting there passed out, literally watching parts of Saw because it happened to be on that cable channel. And nobody's
Mhm.
protesting. We're all just like, all right, we're tired and it's like 112 degrees outside. Fuck it. And I'm rotating, like 12 of us rotating between the showers. That was it. But so like I was gradually exposed to more and didn't really think much of it. Um
Yeah.
and then in college I got interested when I came home in Resident Evil. Now I came into the Resident Evil games via the Mila Jovovich movies. They kind of got me initially interested, and then it was like, it's kind of cool. It's kind of creepy, but I can digest this. This is kind of working for me, and so it kind of culminated over the course of years of me getting more and more interested. And then my roommates in college gifted me a copy of, and I still have it on my shelf. I have a PS2 copy of Resident Evil 4. So
Mhm.
just scared the shit out of me, like so badly. I tried to do the beginning of the game, and I was so freaked out. And then the chainsaw came out, and it was just panic running everywhere. And wildfire, I died so much. It was so bad.
It'll happen.
It was great. It was great. I loved it. Now, what was yours?
Okay, so reflecting far back to the times of Nintendo and all that stuff, I'm pretty sure that there was like shitty versions of like original NES games like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff, because those games were made, they existed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when I think back, the furthest back that I could solidly remember was when I had the PS1 and I got the original Resident Evil Director's Cut, which I still have as a disc. I still have that, and I think I have the jewel case somewhere.
Hold
But
on to those
I
OGs.
I still have the original disc, and let me tell you, when you when you get to the first dog's jump scare, it's for the first time you never forget it.
Dude,
It's amazing.
yes. No, I'm
And
wholeheartedly agreeing
then
with that because tried to play that early on in my horror exposure, and that first dog appearing freaked me out so much.
you never forget your first dog
Never
in
do.
Resident Evil.
Your first zombie dog.
Um, yeah. Uh, but
So
yeah, I think that was my first like actual video game that I can think of uh that I remember in like an active kind of way
mhm. It's funny to
or
me.
clear.
It's you now that you're saying it, I think about it. It's funny to me that for both of us, even though we've diverged in our interest in horror games, it's funny to me though, and I'm sure you'd find this for a lot of people, that kind of the origin for us in the genre of horror games was with Resident Evil. And just,
Mhm.
I mean, this is something we definitely Voidwalkers. We will talk more on this later, but just speaks to the impact that franchise actually has on the genre itself because for so
Yeah.
many people, one, two, three, or four is their first exposure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Which one and four, I think you said four.
Mhm.
One and four are very, very different.
They are. They are.
Um,
Yeah. And I mean,
which
four
is
was in development,
fascinating.
and four was in development for many, many years before it came
Mhm.
out because they wanted to do something new and different. And there are some who also point to four being a turning point where the genre starts to move away from horror. Though that's where my one argument is as a noob in horror, four was scary for me. so,
Mhm.
so the first time I played four was so scary. I had to go online, look up a game guide that happened to walk through everything in detail because I couldn't, I was literally like pausing and reading ahead because between me sucking at the mechanisms of the gameplay and me being so terrified, I was afraid to walk forward in the game. I was afraid to
Four,
like just take a step forward. I was like, ah, someone's gonna kill me.
yeah, I share a fair bit of that with Resident Evil One, especially the tank controls. Like if you Voidwalkers out there have never had to manage tank controls before, try
Oh man. And it's
it. Try
still
it.
it's still fun. Like it's funny to me because I've actually got I've got Resident Evil 1 on my PSP, that old
Mhm.
generation PSP. But like that's and like I still love playing the OG versions even if I have a special place in my heart too for the remakes. It's like there's a special place in my heart for all of them. But yeah.
Mhm.
Now I will add to 4 was the first game I really sat down and tried to play. I did
Yeah.
somewhere in between all of that also attempted playing Silent Hill, the
Mhm.
original Silent Hill. Holy fucking shit, those first 10 minutes I could never get past. They were so scary. With the camera angles changing and wandering with you, and then the things coming out, and the oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
So so what about horror books? What
horror.
was your first horror book?
Oh my gosh. See, that's where it's more difficult. Like, in what people would technically classify as horror literature, I got into that arguably much, much later. Mostly
Mhm.
because, even as a kid, I kind of swore off horror as a kid because I was like, too scary, nope. So I generally stayed away from everything Stephen King and this. And it wasn't until adulthood, honestly, like less than 10 years ago that I started being like, oh, hey, let me start. I mean, that was around the time, like by that point, I was into Resident Evil, all this other stuff. We had, some of our mutual friends, I'd be like, okay, tell me more about Stephen King because I don't know a lot about this and you're a huge fan of it. So
Mhm.
getting to know more, um, I would say that I read Carrie early on in my Stephen King exploration. So I did go into that one, but I feel like for me, and this is going to be stretching it a little because it's more science fiction, but it rides pretty closely on the edge of horror. It's graphic, it's tense, it's suspense in the way that horror does. It just leans more into the science fiction aspect. In that regard, my first book was Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park,
Mhm.
which and I say that more because yes, these movies sit more people are probably like, "Oh, that's science fiction. That's action. It's science fiction." And I'm like, "Okay, but look objectively at the very first Jurassic Park movie. I wasn't scared of it, but that movie, I know people who would be scared of that because that movie wasn't necessarily pulling anything insane with it. I mean, I equate it on kind of the same level as like the original Halloween movie, where it's not necessarily going out of its way to be gratuitous, but it builds tension in the same way. And the books even more so. And the books get even more graphic and gratuitous. They get these crazy scenes where they're on a river and the T-Rex is stalking them and it nearly has them and then it's caught because the trees are too thick and so it can't get through them and you're sitting there going and Grant's sitting there with the two kids being like, "Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit." So to me, that was probably my first exposure into horror, and I wouldn't have even realized it as a kid. It's more just objectively as an adult looking back and having gone back as an adult and watching Jurassic Park again and going, you know what? Some of this would have been tense for other people. It didn't bother me because I was obsessed with dinosaurs, but, for other people, I could see where this could be a little tense for them.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. I would say Jurassic Park was my first loose intro into horror literature. I didn't start deliberately looking at that genre in literature though until probably about 10 years ago, and that was probably Stephen King and some adjacent authors. I still mainly read science fiction, so I would say most of the horror literature that I've read has been Stephen King for the ones
Mhm.
that I could actually complete because holy fucking shit, that man writes long books.
Yeah.
What about you? What about you for literature?
Um. Well, going back to childhood, I would say Goosebumps. That the series Goosebumps was my first foray into horror.
See, while all of
Um.
y'all were reading Goosebumps, I was reading Animorphs. I was that kid.
Yeah. Well, nothing wrong with Animorphs.
No, no. It's funny because that's the divergent path I took.
Animorphs did a lot for a lot of children,
Hmm.
and I think it was great.
I think
Um.
Goosebumps too. It's a very nostalgic thing of people. I mean, there's a reason. Whatever you feel about Remake Central, that is Disney now, you know, there's a reason they've gone back and revisited Goosebumps.
Yeah. I mean, Jack Black and money. Um. It,
But
we could
also because
say
they
that.
sell nostalgia, and it's something that's very
Yeah.
nostalgic from childhood.
Yeah. Of course. But yeah, like with with things like Goosebumps, it was just one of those things that as a kid, being a voracious reader, that was the horror that I could access easily enough, and kind of understand what was going on. Um, Whereas some other books, like some Stephen King and whatnot, I don't know if I'd understand it, but you know, um,
Well, and for a kid,
I
King has some of his books where it's just like some of them are more concise and consolidated, so the narrative is more strictly focused. But then you get ones where he spends a lot of time sidetracking,
yeah,
which I feel like for me as a kid that can be difficult.
yeah. Um, and I don't know it. I don't read too much King because, well, we'll put a pin in that. We'll come
Okay.
back to that later, when we talk more about book horror. Anyway, so what is it that you like about the horror genre?
Mm. I mean, one of the things I've leaned into as an adult is,
Mhm.
and it's why I love horror gaming, and it's why I started the Twitch channel that I have, doing what I do, is, and this was kind of came from when I finally sat down and played through all of Resident Evil 4, which, mind you, I tried to play it in college, hit a point, and I was made a legitimate attempt. I wouldn't say I was like halfway. It's just I got stuck at a point and then was so frustrated that I thought, well, I'll restart. Maybe it'll go a little easier now that I kind of know what to expect. And then I accidentally overwrote my save game, got frustrated, and went on to do other things for like the next 10 years. Fast
Yeah,
forward to like less than 10 years ago, I sat down and went, I'm honest to God going to play this game all the way through now. And I realized in the course of it that this is fun. It's still scary as shit for me. But for me, it it induced laughter because it was funny, and I felt like, well, what if I could share this with people? Maybe it'd be even funnier. And that sort of opened up a door for me where horror for me is an outlet for stress. I love
yeah,
that it's a way to disengage with serious media, but because I cope with laughter, it's also funny, it's hilarious. I have to fully admit, I enjoy getting a good scare. As long as it's not like a traumatizing scare, like, sorry, I've still not touched the grudge after all these years. There's certain things I'm just not going back to. But, a good scare is fun. I remember going to a haunted maze in college, and it was absolute comedy. It was brilliant. It had the people with the chainsaws, and of course, these are haunted mazes. This is one of those ones where there's no actual chains. They're not actually going to touch you, but they're going to get pretty damn close. And I thought that whole thing was hilarious, even though we spent the entire time, like this little group of five of us, linked together, gripping each other's hands, running through. And then at one point, we lost a member of our group, and we said the one guy in our group, I were like, Daryl, you need to go find her. Literally, like then three of us sat literally huddled together in this little triangle circle, huddled together, and I don't know where in this haunted maze, basically sitting there going, "Don't scare us! We're waiting for our friend. He went to look for our other friend. Please don't scare us." We just sat there shouting. But so I love the adrenaline rush and the chaos and the tension, especially the release afterwards, because it's hilarious. And then you get these great stories from it. So
Yeah.
to me, it's so much fun. And then going further into the genre, I love the exploration, the characters, the stories, that you can also get out of the genre. Like, I think there's a lot of underrated things in horror. There's also a lot of overrated things, but as is with that genre, you can also get, gratuity, which is sometimes a little much, but pin in that for later. But that's
Yeah.
I just love the experience of it. It's become very social for me. But
Hmm.
now even to when I'm on my own, it's just enjoyable. So,
Yeah.
what is it for you?
For me, when it comes to horror, the thing that really draws me in the most is the things that it can say, the messages that it can relay, the tales that it can tell, um, and how it can tie into uh, the culture of the day, the zeitgeist, the decade, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and how it brings about a lot of things where people can talk about subjects without talking about subjects. It acts as kind of a safe haven for a lot of people in that sense, and because of that, and because you can design all sorts of monsters and situations and things like that, whether it be something external, internal, or otherwise, there's a lot of really good avenues that you can take with horror that people might not even think of, um, but that clicks with them, especially people who might be a minority, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of really good opportunities to give minorities a voice through horror and to give them a way to relay the things that are going on in life related to them through that medium
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Yeah. So
Um,
kind of the underlying themes, the subtext,
yeah.
the ability for horror to allow people to engage with difficult, maybe more difficult to discuss topics
Mhm.
in a way
Or
that
even
or just engage in some say some things without saying them overtly.
yeah, or even socioeconomical issues, right? Like there's a reason that a lot of haunted house stories are popular these days. It's because people can't afford housing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, there's a reason that there's a lot of things involving being in a rough position in life that's
Mm-hmm.
popular. It's because people are experiencing that.
Yeah.
And it's a way for them to be able to talk about it, to get it out of, and to possibly come up with ways that they can do something about that,
Yeah.
whether it be big or small, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
It's also just ways for it to sort of comment on the state of current culture. I find myself thinking, because I've seen some videos of gameplay from it recently, but like A Quiet Place.
yeah,
Those films, they're also sort of commenting on how noisy our current lives are, because now all
yeah,
that noise can get you killed.
hmm,
And so it's a sort of comment on, and it's not necessarily a comment that is saying anything particular, like specific, like you should or shouldn't, but it's sort of taking everything and forcing it into this sort of micro universe and blowing it up so it's that much more evident of, oh yeah, this is the world we live in, and this is how different this is. This
yeah,
is what happens when you take away this, or I mean, I know we'll cover this later of like consumerism and zombies.
yeah, yeah. Like that's a great one. Zombies
Hmm.
and consumerism. You
Yeah.
know, those things are very prevalent
Hmm.
even to today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even like, again, another one we'll
Relevant.
touch later of vampires and, self-identity being part of marginalized communities, queer identities,
Yeah,
sexual identity, all of those. So, yeah, I have to agree. That's one of the things that kind of goes in, for me, it goes into what I found really enjoyable now that I've gotten into the horror genre is it's more than, and when you really start looking into it, there's plenty of movies that I will say that are just there to be there and they're not necessarily out there to say much. But then there's some really brilliant ones that don't even necessarily come off. Like they're not necessarily advertising about being big, deep themes, but are
Mhm.
saying, when you start to look at them, whether intentionally or not, they are saying things. And part of it's just them being driven by the culture of the people who are creating them and the culture that they're exposed with or what they know or what's around them. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this is still dictated by what is it that
Mhm.
and like, I mean, I know there's some historic set horror, but I feel like a lot of horror and horror media is set to whatever the current culture is. And part of it's that relation of that relatability to the audience,
Yeah.
you know.
Um, and that's something that we can talk about later. Certainly, I have opinions on that I think tie especially well with book style horror.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to dive into more horror authors just because partly on one end I also want to know more horror authors. Because I will
Yeah.
admit I've read some Stephen King, listened to it. I have actually probably and what I find more like I find some of it I love what I love about his or I enjoy about his writing is that he doesn't shy away from just what if you name strange circumstance and what does that do to
Mhm.
people. And I find that that's a lot of what he has is whether it's more internally focused or externally focused through the action of the story. It's sort of a what happens when you put people in this existence. It's something that I feel like is a very easy way to describe The Walking Dead. What if
Yeah.
people's zombies boom? And because really, and because Kirkland has said has said initially that was doing it as a character study. Of
Yeah.
what if I just throw this giant wrench in this world and see what it does to people. And that's, again, it's something I genuinely, whatever you feel about that show and later seasons, I enjoy the character study,
Mhm.
you know. So, but yeah, it's definitely people don't give horror enough credit for how layered that genre is.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, man,
It's a real shame.
it is. But so I know we're probably coming up on the end of our work for today. A little bit of a
Mhm.
shorter intro for you all, but don't worry, these conversations get much longer. Much, much longer.
Well, when you say it like that, you're enticing everybody to listen in.
Please do.
So,
Please do. Yeah. So, but like, where are we starting with? Like, we're going to be talking about all sorts of things like what makes a good horror game? What other stuff do we have coming up for our lovely listeners and or viewers, namely the Voidwalkers out there?
yeah. I know that we will be talking about specific things like the evil within, for example. We'll be talking about like more genre specific kind of broad things like we mentioned zombies and vampires before. Um, other games like Dead by Daylight.
Mm-hmm.
Like it all depends. Some will be very broad, some will be not so broad.
Mm-hmm.
We will do our best to cover what we can, though I will say that no matter how much time we have, I don't think we could ever have enough time to cover everything.
I mean, considering so many of these topics are so loaded that you could have multiple conversations about any one of them. I mean, just to throw
Mhm.
example, I mean, you and I both know we could talk for hours about the evil within. So, and
That is
that's
very
just
true.
one game. One
Yeah,
game, folks. Actually, two. I'm sorry. It's two games.
two games.
Two games and a lot of feelings.
Yeah,
so so folks, you've got some big stuff to look forward to, whether you're a filmmaker, a gamer, a film lover, a TV lover, a reader. We'll hopefully be able to touch on a little bit of everything, or if you just love exploring genres, you know the way all these mediums approach it, what works, what doesn't work, what we like, what we dislike. I'm looking forward to
yep.
diving into horror. It's just so funny
Oh
because if
yeah,
you had told this to me, if you had told Kid Me, specifically Kid Me right after I watched The Grudge, oh, one day you're going to spend like a podcast like talking about horror in all its forms, I would have looked at you and been like, the fuck are you talking about? Except I would have said it that way because that version of me didn't swear at all.
and and I would have said, I'm gonna get the police now. Uh,
For you
so
strange people coming
you
to me.
know, yep. We learned stranger danger.
It's like that South
And
Park Future
speaking,
Self episode.
yeah, and speaking of danger, where can our Voidwalkers find you?
Well, I can be found on Twitch, Lady Hyacinth 57. Yes, Lady Hyacinth as in the flower. No, not for Bridgerton. Yes, I've watched Bridgerton, but it's nothing to do with Bridgerton. I used Hyacinth as an alias long before Bridgerton was a thing. It's my thing. But yeah, I play a lot of Resident Evil, Evil Within, explore a lot of other horror games. I am prepping to eventually do a 24-hour one where I attempt to do the 8 main chapter Resident Evil games, ideally in 24 hours. Some of those games still have like a 4 to 8 hour runtime for me, so this could be interesting. Now, where can our lovely Voidwalkers find you, Dave?
Oh yes. Y'all can find me at twitch.tv/sheriff_Flynn. There I play a fair bit of Dead by Daylight. I play some other things too, like I'm into Metroidvanias. I'm going to be doing, and probably when this podcast comes up, it'll start. I'm going to be in the midst of the Year of the FMV, where I play video games that are FMVs. They have full motion video, which means live people doing live things in live spaces as part of the video game element. A lot of them are horror related, though not all of them. And, you know, other than that, just some miscellaneous stuff here and there.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Yep. And anyone, you want to chat with us, we pop in on each other's stream chats periodically too. So don't be shy. Say hi.
Yep.
We don't.
Any questions, comments, or concerns, you can email us at theconfabulators@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm. And just questions, comments, concerns, corrections, but mind you, if you are a dick about the corrections, you may get called out.
Yep. All right.
So,
Uh,
anyways, I'm Liz,
and I'm Dave.
and we are the Confabulators, and we thank you so much for joining us in our horror exploration thing. I don't know.
Great job.
What's a confabulator?
Ask your parents. But not the My Buddy doll. All right.
Don't ask him.
Yes. And have a lovely rest of your week.
The Confabulators is hosted by Dave Bockenkamp and Liz Strauss. Editor is E.W. Klein. Theme music, Oh Heavens, is by Cassidy B., composer and artist. Found at cbrva.cardd.co.